Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Breaking Muscle podcast. I'm your host, Tom McCormick, and today I'm going to be flying solo again as I talk you through what I think is the secret weapon to help you add more lean muscle long term. And that secret weapon is the mini cut. A mini cut is a short-term aggressive fat loss phase. They are a vital tool in your muscle building toolbox. Well, they are in my opinion anyway. Now, I know a fat loss phase being good for muscle building capacity might seem counterintuitive, but trust me when I say they can be a game changer for you. Before I explain exactly why they're so effective in aiding maximal muscle gain long term, let me outline exactly what a mini cut is and isn't, because sometimes I see people attempt a mini cut and get themselves in trouble by violating some of the key principles. So, what is a mini cut? Well, as I initially outlined, a mini cut is a short-term dieting phase designed to elicit rapid fat loss. So the two key characteristics of a mini cut are, number one, a short duration, and usually that's 2 to 6 weeks. And number two, a fast rate of fat loss. So any longer than 6 weeks, and in my opinion it's just a regular diet. In practical terms, my mini cuts that I run myself or I put clients through are rarely more than 4 weeks. So they are very much a short-term, aggressive, focused attempt at fat loss. Now, after analysing the data on about 100 different people, I've sort of guided through a mini cut. The average duration is actually about 3.2 weeks. So if we call it on average about 3 weeks. So compared to the typical diet people would use to get in photo shoot shape or contest shape for a bodybuilding show, they're much, much shorter, and hence the name, a mini cut. Now, this length, 3 weeks, is long enough to see impressive fat loss results though. The rapid fat loss you can achieve in a mini cut is actually often visually quite dramatic. The short nature of the mini cut facilitates the sort of second characteristic I identified, which is that rapid rate of fat loss. Being short-term and hyper-focused about your fat loss efforts allows you to go at a rate of loss that would not be sustainable for longer periods of time. You might be thinking, well, how fast can I go? A little bit later on, I will provide detailed guidelines on exactly determining how quickly you should be losing weight in a mini cut. But the general theme to take away at this point is that you should be losing weight as fast as possible whilst maintaining muscle mass. And the reason for that relatively vague answer is that the ideal rate will differ from person to person, but don't worry, I will explain exactly how to determine what is best for you based on your circumstances. Now, you might be thinking, but if I lose fat really, really fast and lose weight on the scale really fast, won't I risk losing muscle mass? Is dieting aggressively going to cause me to lose that hard-earned muscle? Well, I've got good news for you. Recent research out of Dr. Bill Campbell's physique lab at the University of South Florida found that participants did not lose any muscle mass during a severe 2-week diet. Now, that was a 37.5% calorie deficit they were in, so that is a very significant calorie deficit. And they saw no muscle loss. And it wasn't just a one-off. In another interesting study done previously, they found that athletes following a high-protein diet with a 24% calorie deficit for 4 weeks lost about 1.25 pounds, so 1.25 pounds of fat per week, without any negative impact on muscle mass, hormone levels, or performance. So, if you're concerned about muscle loss on a mini cut, don't be, because based on the research and my experience, you won't lose muscle mass if you do things right. Now, let me just give you a bit of a mini cut overview, just to recap a few things to make sure that we are all on the same page at this stage and know exactly what's involved. So, a mini cut overview. It's a short, aggressive fat loss phase. Mini cuts are a powerful tool designed to set you up for more muscle gain. It is not a long-term get shredded diet. The aim is rapid fat loss and muscle retention. A mini cut creates the potential for optimally efficient muscle gain longer term. Mini cuts also extend the runway for a bulk. Essentially, they create a bigger window of opportunity to build muscle. And you can extend your bulking cycles when you use mini cuts effectively. Now, the other thing to consider is all of the best muscle building transformations I've seen were when the person started in a relatively lean position. So it may behoove you to do a mini cut to put yourself in that lean position to build the muscle that you want to build. There is research showing how effective they are, as I just outlined, and that the risk of muscle loss when doing them is minimal. Now, one last thing, you must be in a healthy place to capitalize and get the most from a mini cut. So if you're someone who's got a history of binge eating, or you've just come off a long diet and you have quite a lot of diet fatigue and you're very food focused, a mini cut probably isn't a good choice for you. Now, on that basis, let me move on to what a mini cut is not. A mini cut is not a get shredded plan. It's not a strategy to get you in contest shape. Instead, it's a diet that gets you lean enough to be in a good position to build muscle. I'll just reiterate that because that is key. A mini cut is a diet that gets you lean enough to be in a good position to build muscle. We're not talking about being absolutely shredded, peeled to the bone, sort of seeing your internal organs working, stage ready, bodybuilder, contest prep type diet here. We're talking about getting leaner to put yourself in a good position to go to gain. So that's what a mini cut is and isn't. And what are the major benefits of a mini cut? Well, I've kind of alluded to the fact that they help you to build more muscle long term, and that is the primary benefit of them. But let me walk you through how or when you might choose to use a mini cut, and exactly why those details are so important, and how a mini cut can help you build more muscle. So some of the key times people might choose to use a mini cut. Well, the first one is if they've got a holiday or an event coming up that they want to look their best at or look leaner at, and they have a relatively short period of time. Obviously, you can, if you drop a decent chunk of body fat in a short period of time, you will look better short term. Now, more importantly though, in terms of my perspective, is how they can facilitate more muscle gain long term. So one way to look at that is your rate of progress in a muscle gain phase might have stalled, and you might be finding that you're to keep pushing the scale weight up, you're gaining an excessive ratio of body fat to muscle to increase that scale weight. At that point, it's kind of diminishing returns in terms of your continuing your bulking efforts. And you might be better off transitioning to a mini cut, getting leaner, and then going back to bulking from that leaner position. Another consideration when you've been trying to build muscle for a while and bulking up is if a lack of appetite is affecting your ability to eat enough, and therefore making it harder to gain muscle just because you can't consume the calories needed to grow. A fourth consideration is that getting a bit leaner can increase your insulin sensitivity and improve your partitioning ratio, making subsequent muscle gain more efficient. Because a partitioning ratio, all that means is that for every pound of weight on the scales, there's a ratio between how much is lean muscle mass gained and how much is fat mass. And as that ratio begins to drift towards more and more fat and higher ratio of fat, the worse your P ratio is. And if you get yourself into a leaner position, you can improve your P ratio a little bit. That means that when you return to gaining mass, you gain more or a higher proportion of muscle to fat, which is what we want. Next up is reason number 5 that I can see for why you would use a mini cut is if you're a competitor and you never want to get too far away from stage condition. So, the level of body fat needed to be competitive in a bodybuilding show is obviously incredibly lean, and it may be in your favour to never let it drift up too high. So you could use a mini cut to control things when if you find that your body fat is just getting a little bit higher than you want, you can tighten things up and then put yourself in a position to return again to building muscle. And the last one that I find very useful when working with clients is that it allows you to assess what your physique will look like when you're relatively lean or sort of almost in photo shoot shape. Like I have plenty of clients that prep themselves for a photo shoot so they can have pictures of them in their peak condition to showcase how they looked and something to look back on and be proud of. Well, if you get yourself pretty lean, not quite as lean as you need to be for your photo shoot, but you get a sense of how you're going to look, and then it might mean that you can identify certain areas that you want to prioritize to really develop and bring up, or if there's a lagging body part. Now, those are some times when you might utilize a mini cut, and as I've said, the main reason I love mini cuts is they put you in a better position to grow, and they increase the runway for muscle building phases that follow. And this means you can bulk for longer without reaching a body fat that you are either uncomfortable with or that interferes with your capacity to build lean muscle because you're partitioning ratio it becomes poor. But there are other benefits. Now, the first one I would call is, I say to people, is size can be an illusion. A nice little benefit is that I see with many of my clients that take advantage of mini cuts is that you look bigger with your shirt off when you're lean, and that is particularly important in the summer. When summer rolls around and the opportunity or the chance of having your shirt off increases and is more common to be sort of with shirt off around the pool or at the beach, for example, it's useful to know that you can actually look bigger whilst being smaller, because taking a mini cut can quickly transform how muscular you appear. Being lean gives the illusion of looking bigger than you actually are. So, for example, being 170 pounds and nice and lean generally, on average, looks more impressive than being 180 pounds, but at the top of your sort of bulking and the higher body fat range that you like to be in. And so, mini cuts can rapidly make you look much better if you're going to have your shirt off. So you might as well use that to your advantage if that's going to be something that, number one, you care about, or number two, is going to be a situation you find yourself in. No one wants to be the guy that's known as lifting but doesn't look like they lift. So having a mini cut just before a holiday or a pool party can be useful. And it can also make you feel a lot more confident about yourself and how you look in those situations, which is not to be sort of dismissed. Obviously we want to feel good about ourselves, and if taking a mini cut can help you feel comfortable in your own skin, well, take advantage of that. Now, the next thing I find are that mini cuts create momentum, and this is a really powerful tool, one that I found very beneficial, and for hard gainers, guys that struggle to see changes in their physique, is really powerful. And that is that losing fat is much quicker than building muscle. So thus, a properly executed mini cut can provide you with evidence that you are in control of your physical appearance. It provides kind of a proof of concept that if you apply smart training and nutrition, you can elicit positive outcomes. Now, that's shocking news. I know, like, if you train right and eat right, you can get results, but it is something that some people feel like they cannot achieve, that they're just destined to be stuck in the same physique forever. Well, actually, using a mini cut can get you to see some, impressive visual changes and realize that you are in control and you can take ownership of your body and how it looks. And this is really powerful and should not be dismissed or underappreciated. Like many a guy I've found, in my experience, many guys give up on transforming their physique because they don't see a change. Investing a bit of time and effort in a mini cut is very rewarding from both a physical and a mental perspective. It builds trust in you and your confidence in yourself that your efforts will be rewarded. And as I said, this was huge for me. The first time I had success with changing my physique at all was when I got lean. I got really, really lean, taking an aggressive cutting diet. It was 4 weeks at the time, and it gave me loads of confidence and a lot of encouragement that, okay, I can push this further, and if I can have success getting lean, well, I can have success building muscle. The principles might change slightly, or the way I apply those principles might change because I need to gain mass, but I saw that my effort was rewarded, and that really encouraged me to sort of stay on the path and keep persisting at building muscle. Now, it took more time, but I persisted, and I believe large of that was because of the belief I developed from having success with my mini cut. And that can be useful for you or any clients you work with. Get a result, realize that you or they can get a result, and then it builds confidence and momentum for everything else you do. The next one is get lean to get big. Now, all of the best muscle building results I've ever seen, all the best transformations I've had with clients I work with when they pack on muscle, they began in a relatively lean position. Now, there are two key elements here. The length of your building phase can be longer if you start out lean, and as I identified, your partitioning ratio and your insulin sensitivity are slightly better if you're lean as well. So if you try to bulk up with a relatively high body fat as your starting point, there is a risk that you will just end up quite fat. As your weight climbs up, so does your body fat, and you'll run into issue with your capacity to gain a desirable ratio of muscle to fat. So your P ratio will deteriorate a little bit. And for most guys that contact me about coaching or training advice, they starting out a bulk with a mini cut will serve them well, because you see, if you get some starting pictures, they're like maybe 15-16% body fat. They want more muscle and they're desperate to do that, but if they chase the muscle from there, pretty quickly they're in north of 20% body fat, and they're not happy with how they look, both from a body fat percentage being higher than they want, but also they don't carry the muscle mass. If they take that mini cut to begin with. They can get lean. They like the fact they can see their abs, but then also it gives them a really big runway to pack on some size. Okay, so talking of like kind of skinny fat, like or should I say, if you pursue bulking without getting lean in the first place, often the guys I have spoken to, they end up skinny fat, and I think mini cuts can be a real great solution to skinny fat. Because they're a phenomenal tool to solve skinny fat, basically because you can quickly strip away the fat you have. And if you're skinny fat, you tend not to have a load of fat, just enough to maybe affect your physique a little bit. You can strip that away and then put yourself in a position to bulk up while still staying relatively lean. The next thing I like about mini cuts is they're short and sharp. They're great because they're so efficient. Due to their short length, they can be very aggressive. And of course, efficient is good. You can get in, get the job done, and everyone likes that. And from a coaching perspective, I found that invaluable. Getting a quick result for a client helps build their trust in me and their buy-in to everything I suggest in future. All of my future advice, they're more receptive to because I've got them a result. So consider that if you're working with clients yourself. Now, why might you need a mini cut? Well, I've identified, I think at this point, some reasons why they're good. But just to be clear, if your goal is primarily muscle gain, why do I think you need a mini cut? Well, during a muscle building phase, you need a calorie surplus to gain weight or to gain significant amounts of muscle. That a surplus is need to be there unless you're a complete beginner or coming off a massive layoff. So if you do everything right, a good proportion of the weight you gain will be muscle. That's great. However, it is inevitable that unfortunately some of the weight gain will be fat. We can't store just purely muscle, can't just grow pure muscle. That's completely normal. Don't worry, it's not just you. No one builds just pure lean muscle. Anyone that says they do or says you can gain 100% lean muscle naturally is lying to you. Now, the problem is that over time, as you're gaining weight and you gradually gain a little bit of fat, that becomes slightly more and more fat, and the ratio starts to become that you are gaining less muscle for every amount of fat you gain, especially as your body fat levels climb. Your P ratio deteriorates, as I've mentioned a few times. Now, when your P ratio gets to a certain level, it can be problematic. That really it's a false economy to keep trying to bulk up and gain weight. All that you do is you get the fatter you are, the fatter you get, and that's not a good place to be. And then, if you're at that position and you're not happy with the amount of muscle mass, but you're also not lean either, that creates a bit of a conundrum. People want more size, but they are getting fatter chasing it. And the gains they make on the scale don't result in them looking better. They just end up looking fatter. And a mini cut can solve that issue for you. A short-term aggressive cutting phase allows you to rapidly improve your P ratio and make your next bulking phase more productive, and you look better, that little bit leaner. So I've made my case for really, I think at this point, why I think they're so effective, why they're so useful, and why you should consider them. Now let's on to the practicalities of implementing them. How fast should you lose weight during a mini cut is a question that I get a lot. Now, given that it's a short-term strategy, taking you from, you generally the end or the top weight of a bulking cycle to being just lean enough to grow, the risk of muscle mass in that situation is actually very low. Muscle loss tends to only really occur if you're dieting for a really long time, so chronic long-term diets, or when you're extremely lean. So if you're getting in shape for a bodybuilding show and you have been dieting for a long time and to extreme levels of body fat, yeah, there's a chance of muscle loss. Neither are really a concern during a mini cut though, because we're not getting really, really lean, we're just getting lean enough, and it's a short-term approach. So how fast can you do it? Well, it depends upon somewhat what your current body fat is and how high your body fat is when you start your mini cut. But generally, the fatter you are, the quicker you can lose weight without any risk of muscle loss. So, as a rule of thumb, I suggest the following guidelines. If you're above 15% body fat, I think you can lose between 1.5% and 2% of your body weight per week. If you're in the 12 to 15% body fat range, I suggest you lose 1 to 1.5% of your body weight per week. 10 to 12% body fat range, lose 0.5 to 1% of your body weight per week. And well, if you're 10% body fat or less, you don't need a mini cut. You should just focus on growing. You're in a great spot to build muscle, so get on with it. Now, how about going about calculating the deficit to allow you to lose at that rate? Well, using the old-time information of a pound of fat equates to approximately 3,500 calories, which is sort of quite well known. we can begin to estimate how much of a deficit you need to lose at an appropriate rate. So if a pound of fat contains 3,500 calories, to lose a pound of fat a week, you would need a deficit of 500 calories per day, because 500 times 7 is 3,500. Now, to establish your target deficit, simply calculate your suggested percentage weekly weight loss figure. So, for example, to calculate a 2% loss, you would multiply your body weight by 0.02, and for 1.5% it would be 0.015, and for 1% it would be 0.01, and for 0.5% it would be 0.005, and so on. Anyway, once you know the percentage you're looking to use, you can calculate that, and after you've calculated the amount of weight you need to lose, you can then multiply it by 500 to find your daily deficit. So let me walk you through a couple of examples to maybe clear that up. Apologies if it's clear as mud. Let's try and make that a bit clearer. So if I take an example, and I've got a guy called Bob. We'll say Bob's 150 pounds and 15% body fat. Bob is going to aim to lose 2.25 pounds a week. That's 1.5% of his body weight per week, because he's at 15%, and that's the sort of one of the suggested ranges I aim for. Now, to achieve this, he needs a daily calorie deficit of 1,125 calories, and that's calculated as follows: 150 pounds, his weight, times his rate of loss, which is 1.15%. 1.5% of his body weight per week. So to calculate that, it's 150 times 0.015, and that comes out at 2.25. So then we have 2.25 pounds to lose, and how do we turn that into calories? As I said, you times it by 500 to give you your daily need, and so that's 1,125 calorie deficit for the day. So that's a pretty aggressive diet. Now, Steve, on the other hand, say Steve is 180 pounds and he's 10% body fat, so he's leaner than Bob. So we don't want him to lose at quite such a fast rate, because number one, he doesn't have so much fat to lose, but also, we don't want to risk muscle loss. So for him, we're going to use a lower rate of loss. He's going to lose 0.5% of his body weight a week. So still a good pace to be losing at, but not as fast. So he will need a daily deficit of 450 calories to achieve his desired rate. And the reason for that is 180 pounds times 0.005, which will give him his 0.5% loss a week, comes out at 0.9 pounds per week loss. Now, 0.9 times that 500 calories equals 450. So 450 calories a day will get him losing at the appropriate rate. Now let's delve into a little bit more of the diet details now that we've got the total calories, or the calorie deficit you need to create your loss, is macronutrients. So your macros are protein, carbs and fat. Now, the classic 1 gram per pound of body weight for protein is fine during a meal cut. In my experience, it works really well, and it's exactly what Dr. Campbell found and suggests from his study at the University of South Florida. As far as fat intake goes, during a mini cut, fat intake needs to be high enough to support optimal hormonal function. And fat intakes of around 0.3 grams per pound achieve this. Now, after that level has been met, I prefer to bias carbohydrate intake so as to support high quality and as high as training volume as possible. And I'll give you a bit more detail on that in a second. But just for our examples, Bob would therefore be having 45 grams of fat per day, because he weighs 150 pounds, and 150 times 0.3 equals 45. Meanwhile, Steve would have 54 grams of fat per day, because he was 180 pounds, and 180 times 0.3 is 54. Right, carbohydrates. They make up the remainder of your calories. So if you want to work that out, once you've got the deficit you need, you can then apportion protein and fat based on the numbers I've just given, and see how much your total calories are made up from protein and fat, and then you just, whatever is left over, you apportion to carbohydrates. So a simple way to do this whole process is to multiply your body weight in pounds by 15, and that'll give you about a good ballpark of your maintenance. Then you subtract your required deficit that you calculated earlier, and then after that you set protein and fat based on the guidelines I just gave you. So protein is 1 gram per pound and fat is 0.3 grams per pound of body weight. Now remember that fat is 9 calories per gram, and protein is 4 calories per gram. So if you're having 200 grams of protein, that's 800 calories, and if you are having 70 grams of fat, that would be 630 calories, because 70 times 9 is 630. If you add the protein and fat calories you consume together. That will leave you with a remainder of calories in your allowance, and then that will come from carbohydrates. And to convert that into grams, remember there are 4 calories per gram of carbohydrates. So say it says that you have 400 calories left over, that would equate to 100 grams of carbohydrate, because 400 divided by 4 is 100. Now, moving on to a bit even more detail with your food, I think food choices matter. Food choices you make can set you up for success with a mini cut. Creating a sufficient calorie deficit and consuming an appropriate ratio of macronutrients is vital. They're the most important things. They're the foundational principles of a successful mini cut diet. But what food you eat does matter. And it's not because any foods have a magical fat-burning properties, but because by choosing certain types of foods, you make it easier to adhere to the large calorie deficit and macro targets you need. Now, so as you'll have gathered, calories are going to be low during a mini cut. And when calories are low, you will naturally feel a bit hungry. That's part of the process. You just need to accept it, to be honest. If you want to be effective with a mini cut, you just need to get your head around the fact that you're not going to eat that much and you are going to be in a calorie deficit, but it's only for a short period of time. When calories are low, people can cave into cravings and eat foods that taste great, but 100% opposed to what their goals are at the time, but because of the cravings kick in and take over. Now, if you make smart food choices, you can help avoid that scenario. If you choose nutrient-dense, high-fiber, low-calorie foods, foods that are high on the satiety index, so for example, lean protein sources rather than, or using lean protein sources rather than fatty cuts, because they will fill you up, and the lower fat content per gram means that you get more food volume. And green vegetables and fruits, and choose things like oats and potatoes as your carb sources rather than rice and cereals, then you set yourself up for success by staying full on those types of foods. And there's a reason that bodybuilders have been dieting for decades on foods like oatmeal and egg whites or chicken and broccoli. And it's not because they magically create fat loss, but they help you to stay full and hit the most important goal, which is achieving a calorie deficit. Now, on that basis, I recommend you get at least 80% of your food from what most people would consider clean or whole foods. You're an adult and I want you to eat like one. You can't eat like a kid at a birthday party and expect to get lean or expect to lose weight at the rate we're looking for in a mini cut. If you stick to the 80% clean rule, you should also get sufficient fibre. But just to take the guesswork out of that, I'd say aim for at least 20 grams of fibre a day, and ideally aim for about 15 grams of fibre per 1,000 calories you eat. And that will help you to function well, feel healthy and full all the time. And those are all valuable components to a successful mini cut diet. So the food quality and the composition and the food choices you make, none of these foods are magical, but they can make adhering to the overarching principle of calorie deficit easier. And they can also set you up to have an optimal macronutrient ratio. Now, on that point, it's important to create a calorie deficit, but not a nutrient deficit. And what I mean by nutrients are vitamins and minerals. Now, to some extent, the body's feedback loops consider nutrient intake, not just energy intake. So if you're full of nutrients and full because you've chosen highly satiating foods, you are far more likely to adhere to the diet plan. And if you can adhere to the plan, it will be over before you know it, really, like a mini cut, blink and you miss it type thing. It's just a very short-term approach. And then you can get back to bulking and eating all the great tasting food that you've had to avoid for a couple of weeks. But if you cheat on a mini cut, you just delay your return to mass gaining, and you're really shooting yourself in the foot, and it's a pointless example. Now, a simple rule to help you achieve a nutrient density is to eat the rainbow. And by that I mean eating a wide variety of different coloured fruits and vegetables. If you do that, you will get a diverse micronutrient profile at a very low calorie cost. And that's an ideal combo when mini cutting. By far the most important factors for a successful mini cut are finding a way to adhere to the required calorie deficit and consuming an appropriate macronutrient ratio each day. Now, I've said that a couple of times, but I just want to keep hammering it home. There's no magic foods here. That's the most important principle. Calorie deficit, and then follow that up with an appropriate macronutrient ratio. So a high protein intake, enough fats to optimize hormonal function, and then carbohydrates to support good training. Now, you can fine-tune things a little bit further to optimize results, and that's where nutrient timing comes in. Now, the goal of nutrient timing, or really, let's address this from the goal of your training during a mini cut is to provide a muscle building signal to the body. While you might not actually build much muscle, you will retain it. And in a mini cut, we want maximal fat loss and minimal muscle loss. The best training with mini cut is doing the type of training that builds muscle. This is the training which has much volume as you can recover from. And think of it this way: what builds it best retains it best. High training volumes are best supported by carbohydrates because carbs are the dominant fuel source for hard weight training sessions. The dominant fuel source for high intensity activity, and that's exactly what you do when you're lifting weights. So it makes sense to consume as many carbs as you can get away with and bias the timing of these carbs to be around your workout to fuel your workouts and to aid recovery from workouts. Having carbs pre-workout will increase the quality and quantity of the training you can do, and this means you can provide a more powerful muscle-retaining stimulus. It also means you can do more overall volume in the gym, and more volume equals more calories burned. More calories burned equals more fat loss. Carbs post-workout aid recovery, and you are most nutrient sensitive post-workout, so a greater proportion of the carbs you eat will be shuttled to muscles than fat, and that's great. So you should take advantage of this fact to maximize muscle retention and accelerate your fat loss whilst promoting good training performance. So as a rule of thumb, I suggest having about 2/3 of your daily carb intake in the peri-workout window. And basically what I mean by that is a couple of hours before your train up to a couple of hours after. So if your session's an hour, the 2 hours before, an hour of training, and 2 hours after, that's a 5-hour window. And I would sandwich most of your carbohydrates for the day, about 2/3, into that window. It will help you have really good productive training and also recover from that training. Now, how long should you mini cut? I know I've said it's a 2 to 6 week thing, and on average I do 3 weeks with people, but what are the considerations you need to make to define and determine what is best for you? Well, as a rule of thumb, I'd say at least 2 weeks needs to be long enough for it to be worthwhile. If you do any less than that, it's just a random bit of under eating. It's not really achieving a strategic goal. So I think 2 weeks is a minimum, and 2 weeks can be highly effective if done right. At the other end of the spectrum, I think anything more than 6 weeks will start to increase your risk of muscle loss, and it drifts. It's no longer what I would consider a mini cut. It just becomes a dieting phase. And if you're doing longer than 6 weeks, you want to go at a slightly slower pace per week and do it for longer. But we're looking for aggressive, short-term, rapid fat loss here. We don't want muscle loss. That's the complete opposite. So 2 to 6 weeks is the range for most of the mini cuts I do, and as I say, it centers, averages out at 3 weeks. I found that to be like a real sweet spot for most of my clients, and the reason from that is largely from a practical perspective. It's long enough to see great progress. You can lose quite a lot of fat in 3 weeks, but it's also short enough for the end to always be in sight, and that means that people are better able to knuckle down, do the work, stick to the diet, stick to the calorie deficit needed, do the training even when they're a bit fatigued and calories are low, because they know soon it will be over. And also they're seeing almost on a daily basis a positive change, and that motivates them to keep going and know this is just 3 weeks, but I'm gonna get a great result out of it. Now, exactly how long you mini cut for is down to you. You need to get lean enough to be in a good position to build muscle. Your P ratio improves the lean you are. So from experience, I would say you should be at least sub 15% at the end of a mini cut. Usually it's more effective to be sub 12%. And if you're about 12%, you won't be shredded, but you should have visible abs. And I find that different people have different body fat set points, right? So some people can walk around at 12% quite comfortably. For them, it may be a case of getting to 9% for their mini cut. Other people, 16%, 17% is where they feel comfortable, and if they can just get themselves down to 12, that's great. But basically, as a little rule of thumb, if you're not sure, I give people a guide, my online clients. They should have visible abs without having to do too much flexing. A little bit of a flex is okay maybe, and in some vaguely favourable lighting. If you can see your abs, then you're probably in a decent position to have got what you wanted out of a mini cut. Right, let's get a bit more detail on how you should train during a mini cut. As I said, the goal of a mini cut is to maximise fat loss and minimise muscle loss. The best way to achieve that is to train in a manner which provides a growth stimulus and consume a high protein diet while being in a calorie deficit. And in fact, Dr. Campbell basically highlighted that and advises these exact 3 things after their study. Firstly, a high protein diet, and they suggest 1 gram per pound, which is exactly what I've suggested. Resistance training during the calorie deficit. Absolutely, that's fundamental. Your resistance training is the number one stimulus you have to in terms of providing a signal to retain or even build muscle, and keep the diet short term. So with those parameters in place, from a training perspective, it is vital to keep lifting weights. I've found that utilising training methods that are effective at building muscle is the best way to retain it. a mini cut is not the time to suddenly try and do some crazy high rep fat loss workout or really do something weird and different. Think of it this way: train to stimulate muscle gain and let your diet take care of the fat loss. Long story short, the training you use to build the muscle is probably the best to keep it. So if you have found a certain style of training to be really effective at building muscle, I wouldn't deviate too much from that in a mini cut. You might just have to find that you can't handle quite as much overall workload because the calories are lower. So here are my mini cut training guidelines. Let's ram home that key point again. What built it best keeps it best. Not a time to do dramatically different training. In terms of the rep ranges, anything from 6 to 20 rep range can work really well, but I generally prefer to program 8 to 15 reps for my training and my clients for most of their training in a mini cut. And I suggest you make sure that every set you do is using at least 40% of your 1RM, and generally I prefer it to be more like above the 60% threshold, and I find that really works well. Now, how many sets per week should you do? This is going to vary from person to person, but you should think of it this way. You want to perform more than your minimum effective dose, more than an MED. Knowing your exact minimum effective dose is tricky, but for most people it's probably around about 8 to 10 sets per muscle group per week. Now, I actually encourage you to push a little bit beyond that because, again, we're training with the goal of building muscle. It's just that our diet is causing fat loss. We want to give that signal to try and get your body to build muscle. So you want to be closer to what is termed by Mike Israetel as your maximum adaptive volume. If we can get towards that, that's a great place to be. That's the sweet spot where you would in a surplus be building the most muscle possible without exceeding your capacity to recover. Now, as I've identified, in a mini cut, your MAV or your maximum adaptive volume is going to be slightly different because you're consuming fewer calories and fatigue will be higher. Your ability to tolerate and recover from training will be somewhat diminished. But it's a short-term thing, a mini cut, and those drop-off in ability to tolerate volume don't happen overnight. So if you're only doing it for 3 weeks, I really don't think there would be that much difference in the volume you can handle. Now, how often should you train? Or train each muscle group? I think you should train each muscle group at least twice per week. Training, as I said, is the most powerful stimulus to retaining muscle. It's the biggest signal you can give to your body to retain the muscle. After that is having a high protein content. Now, training large muscle groups twice per week kind of provides a sweet spot of a balance needed between creating a stimulus to retain muscle mass with enough recovery for that muscle to repair and recover each week. But you can find smaller muscle groups might be able to train 3 or 4 times a week within a mini cut. So you might find that you train your legs, back and chest twice a week, but you train your shoulders or your lateral and rear delts, your calves and your arms 3, maybe 4 times a week. A key component of a mini cut training is progression. Just like in any phase of training, you should be striving for progress. You want to be looking for strategic, incremental, progressive increases, maybe if you can even slight increases from volume as well. They're a really good idea if you can achieve them. Within a mini cut, this is doable, but the short duration means and low calorie intake mean that you won't be jumping up massive week to week. It's not going you can be adding sets per week to different muscle groups as you might try to do in bulking phases. The aim is really just to do a little bit more wherever possible. So you might hit another rep, add a little bit of weight here, or do one extra set a week for a particular muscle. Now, those small wins all add up. If you have the mindset of training to progress, training to build muscle, then I think it will serve you really well. Don't get caught up in the trap of kind of accepting, performance is going to be crap and I'm going to lose muscle and I'm going to lose strength because I'm cutting. A mini cut is so short that a loss of performance really shouldn't happen. Okay, last thing with your training, or important thing to consider, it's a bit like your diet, is set yourself up for success. Above all else, the program must be something you can stick to. You need to be able to adhere to it. So pick a plan that you're excited by and motivated to execute, because when calories are low and fatigue kicks in, you're more likely to train hard and effectively with a challenging program that you enjoy than something that you hate. So don't, because you're mini cutting, think you have to suffer more. It's about doing what's effective for you, and that is largely going to be dictated by a program you can work hard on consistently. Also, consider logistical issues so that the weekly training plan that you put in place matches up with what you can achieve, how your lifestyle schedule and your work and family commitments dictate what your availability is. There's no point now trying to do, I'm going to train 7 days a week at 6 a.m. if that's just completely unrealistic for you. So being realistic, but demanding a lot of yourself is the way to approach it. You only have a few weeks to achieve your goal with a mini cut, so you need to line everything up to be as efficient and stress-free as possible. So picking a plan you can adhere to and you're confident is a great way to go about it. Okay, now one of the questions I often get about mini cut is, should I do cardio? If so, what type? How much? So is it cardio or cardi? No. Well, let's be fair. Cardio seems to polarize opinion. And I've had a bit of a love-hate relationship with it over the years, which has fluctuated. Sometimes I've really, really enjoyed cardio, and other times it's just been a real chore. And it seems that that's the same for most people. There's no real middle ground. Now, when it comes to a mini cut, what I say, first of all, is you don't have to do any cardio. You can get great results without doing it. But with that said, cardio can also be a very effective and useful tool to help you reach your fat loss goals. If you can hit the required calorie deficit just by following a diet and just lifting, then do it, that's fine. If, however, your hunger levels are sky high, then you might use cardio as a tool to burn some additional calories that allow you to eat a little bit more food and still achieve the rate of fat loss you're looking for. It's almost like you can buy back a little bit of extra food if you do a bit of cardio. And you need to weigh that up for yourself. And it really does come down to personal preference. If you prefer to eat a bit more and do cardio to reach your weight loss goal, then fine. I would tend to prefer to be a bit more active and be able to eat a bit more than to really have to limit and restrict my food. But if, on the other hand, you dislike cardio and really don't want to do it, and you just prefer to eat less, then that's absolutely fine. You can achieve your goals that way. From a physical perspective, the difference in results between incorporating cardio and not, I think, is negligible, really. From a psychological perspective, the difference could be between you sticking to the plan and reaching your goals, or blowing it off and failing. So it's vital from that component. So I'd really view it through that lens. What's going to help me to adhere to this plan and reach my goal, as opposed to, is cardio physiologically optimal or not. Just pick whichever approach to cardio best suits you and maximises your chance of success. Now, another consideration when it comes to cardio to take into account, though, is the length of your mini cut. In my experience, most people can just kind of willpower their way through a 2-week mini cut with no cardio, because just hanging on to a big deficit and eating not very much for 2 weeks is kind of doable. But if you're someone who's needing 6 weeks for your mini cut, I think you might struggle to just diet your way to success. You probably will need a bit of extra cardio to allow you to eat more food to sustain that 6-week plan. And having a bit more variety in your diet will allow you to succeed in getting really, really lean, or as lean as you want in your mini cut. And when it comes to implementing cardio into mini cuts, I tend to have 2 guidelines that I suggest. Number 1 is that you should spend more time lifting than you do on cardio. And number 2 is to use either extreme of the cardio spectrum. So let's address number 1 first. You should spend more time lifting than you do on cardio. Look, our focus is on bodybuilding and building a lean, muscular physique, not body wasting. We're not trying to strip away to become thin and stringy and an endurance athlete. The long-term goal is to build a lean, muscular physique, not to become a sort of skinny cardio bunny. So the SAID principle, which stands for specific adaptation to imposed demand, says that the body adapts to the stimulus that it is exposed to. You should be providing your body with a signal to gain muscle mass. It will adapt to that, and your physique will represent that and reflect it. If you can achieve this by biasing your time and effort towards weight training, you should do that to achieve that look. And if you find yourself doing more cardio than you are lifting, then I think alarm bells should be ringing, and you've got to realise that if you're doing more cardio, you're treating yourself more like an endurance athlete, and you're more likely to end up looking like an endurance athlete, which is fine if that's your goal. But since this whole premise of this is how can I make myself bigger and more muscular, it's probably not the right approach. Now, the second point I said about cardio was the 2 extremes of the spectrum. So I want you to be extreme about this. And what I mean is either do very, very low or very, very high intensity cardio. If I'm honest, most of the time I favour the lower end, but I really think you should avoid the middle ground. As I said, my preference is for the low intensity work. Low intensity steady state, or LISS as it's often known, helps to increase calorie expenditure and create that calorie deficit, and it's not very demanding. In fact, it can actually aid recovery. And I often suggest to clients that they just get out for a long walk every day and try and boost energy expenditure by doing that, and it will do it without interfering with their ability to recover from their workouts in the gym. And it will also actually, usually works as a really good stress reduction strategy, good for their mindset, and peace of mind and mental health, because they get out, they can just relax, as well as the fact that just moving their body can aid recovery from training. Now, on the absolute opposite end of the spectrum, you have HIIT, or HIIT, high intensity interval training. Now, it can be a very effective tool to boost conditioning and to burn calories. It's very time efficient, but it can also be very draining. It causes about as much fatigue as a hard weight training session. So, you've got to think about that. Like, am I going to program in high intensity interval workout at the expense of a lifting session because the fatigue's the same? So, as I said, we don't want to be doing more cardio than we are lifting. So you've got to weigh that up carefully. So I'm very cautious when incorporating HIIT. But what I also say is many people love doing it, and they love the challenge of it and really enjoy it. And I've had plenty of clients say to me that they really like this type of training. Now, we've got to bear in mind what people like, personal preference, and what's going to keep them motivated to work hard. So I quite often will say, okay, if you love that stuff, we'll put it in. But I will say I have it as a maximum of 2 sessions per week. We don't do a lot of volume on it, but we get them that endorphin buzz. We get them that really high intensity work and time efficient calorie burn, but we manage it so that it's not interfering with their overall ability to recover from the important stuff of lifting weights. What I really do avoid, though, is the middle ground stuff like jogging, maybe like a 5 kilometre, what's that, like 3 mile run, something like that, because it's quite time consuming, it's quite draining on recovery and fatiguing, but it has an interference effect with weight training, and it leads to more adaptations trending towards that endurance training, like I said, and consequently I think it's a poor choice for mini cutting, because again we're shifting the focus away from building the body to becoming more like an endurance athlete. Now, high intensity stuff is closer in terms of the energy system changes you make to lifting weights, so that's less of a concern. And the low intensity stuff, so low intensity, it doesn't really drive any dramatic adaptations. It just burns some calories at low fatigue cost. Right, when should you mini cut? An important consideration with mini cuts is where to place them within your overall training plan, or if you think of your whole year's worth of training, at what point am I going to put the mini cut in? And this isn't often overlooked. Many people fall into the trap of being really reactionary with their use of mini cuts. They are vaguely aware of what a mini cut is and what it can do, but they don't use it strategically. Instead, they find that when they're bulking up, they just lose a little bit of definition and they panic and they jump straight into a mini cut. But you should aim to be strategic and proactive with your planning, not random and reactionary. If you're random and reactionary, you'll get random results. So, as I've said in plenty of articles and on this podcast before, I believe you should take a big picture view to planning your training and nutrition. Furthermore, I think your training and nutrition should work synergistically to have a complementary effect and like an additive effect. So if you put the two of them together, you can kind of almost get a 1 + 1 = 3 approach if you really get training and nutrition to match up. I did a whole podcast on periodizing your nutrition to match your training, so give that a listen if you want to learn more about that. But by periodizing both your training and your nutrition to sync up with one another, you can elevate your levels or your results to reach the next level. And you can move past maybe being intermediate to really okay, I'm stuck at a plateau of being intermediate. How do I move to that next level and of excelling and really becoming advanced? This is one key tool for that. Now, the key benefit of a mini cut is its ability to extend the time you can spend building muscle long term. They're best placed at the end of a consistent building phase. So that's when I suggest you use a mini cut. Don't fall into the trap of yo-yoing between mini bulks and mini cuts. Mini bulks are a terrible idea in my opinion. Gaining muscle is a slower process than losing fat, as I've said several times, and you need time to create momentum, and significant gains in muscle mass take time. Your training should reflect this, and how you schedule your training should reflect this. So you want to bias, if you want to build your physique, more of your year should be spent in a surplus building muscle than it should be cutting. So don't bounce back and forth between the two, which will just end up in spinning your wheels. Now, like I said, I've identified in before how I like to think a big picture, and you should plan your training out. I've also identified the benefits of like a strength phase or a maintenance phase, or what I call a solidification phase at the end of a bulk. And this phase really helps you to consolidate your gains and avoid the risk of muscle loss. Now, that risk of muscle loss is higher if you're going into like a contest prep or a photo shoot longer diet, because you're going to get extremely lean and diet for longer. With a mini cut, that risk is lower. Now, you can quite easily, at the end of a building phase, go straight into a mini cut without a maintenance phase, I think. But for hard gainers, which is the guys I tend to work with online, I normally keep this solidification or maintenance phase in, because they've struggled to gain muscle mass for years and years. It's a real uphill battle for them. I don't want to risk giving up any muscle mass unnecessarily, so I like to take a slightly conservative approach and put that maintenance phase in. So they would do like a building phase, and I typically break that into 4 mini phases, each of 3 weeks, or 3 to 4 weeks depending on the person, but roughly 12 weeks of building, then about 3 weeks to 4 weeks of solidification, and then we take the mini cut. And as I said, on average it's 3 weeks. So we're working on an average there, or generally I have 12 weeks of kind of bulking, a 3-week maintenance, and then a 3-week cut, and then we repeat that ratio again. And then if we do it a third time through, usually what happens is after the maintenance phase, then I put them into a slightly longer diet, and that's like, let's get shredded now. Let's see how you look absolutely shredded. That's hard gainers, and I think the key takeaway there for hard gainers is that, and I think this really reflects the moral of the story for hard gainers, is that they can build muscle. There is a risk if they don't do the maintenance phase of muscle loss, and it's not a risk I'm really inclined to take with anyone. But the key point is, if you do things sensibly and strategically, you can build muscle as a hard gainer. It might take you a little bit longer, the progress may be a bit slower, you might need to have a few more maintenance phases than a regular dude who finds packing on sides easier, but it's worth doing for the long-term results. Now, as I just identified, regular guys who wouldn't consider themselves a hard gainer might be able to just go building phase, mini cut, building phase again, so like a 12-week building phase, a 3-week mini cut, a 12-week building phase, a 3-week mini cut, then a 12-week building phase. Then I would put the maintenance phase in before the longer diet, because again, they're going into a longer diet, and even for regular guys, the risk of muscle loss is slightly higher when they're going to diet for longer and get leaner. So I think that illustrates the difference perhaps between hard gainers and what, either genetically gifted or just regularly average guys. But the other thing to point out is that you should be kind of gaining weight from phase to phase. So through your building phase, your weight goes up, it comes down a bit, but not back to where it started, and then you gain back up, and then it comes down a little, and then gains back up, and so that trend line is always up, but the mini cut just pulls your weight down a little bit, gets your body fat in a good position, and then you go again. So it's not a perfect linear line, but the trend line is definitely up, and so you should be gaining weight over time. If every time you do a mini cut, your weight's just hitting the same point again, unless you're noticeably leaner on every subsequent mini cut you do, something's going wrong. Right, so your body weight should steadily be climbing up on average through each building phase. Keep remembering that. I don't want to be at sort of pains to keep repeating myself, but a mini cut is not a get shredded diet. They're designed to get you lean enough to be in a good position to return to muscle building or mass gaining training again. It's like taking one step backwards to take 2 or 3 steps, maybe even 4 steps forward. So your weight should be climbing up in time. And it's one of the reasons a mini cut can be such a great investment is if you decide to skip a mini cut and you think, I'm just going to extend my bulk for another phase of training, say beyond that 12 weeks I said, say you make it 15 weeks, you extend the amount of time that you're able to bulk, but you might be finding that you're disproportionately gaining body fat at that point, which just extends the length of the diet you need to get back to a good point afterwards. So whilst you may get an extra 3 weeks of bulking, you may also have just cost yourself 3 weeks of dieting. And since fat loss should be quicker than muscle gain, that 1-to-1 ratio of 3 weeks extra bulking but for 3 week cost of dieting isn't wise. If you get things right, you'll find that you can maximize the efficiency and the time bulking compared to cutting. So mini cuts, I believe, long term will result in more muscle for you. And rather than the traditional approach of maybe taking 20 weeks of bulking and dieting for then 12 weeks, I think you're better served to use mini cuts to allow for to create that high ratio of training effort spent trying to build muscle. Muscle gain, again, I'm going to repeat myself, is slower than fat loss. So it makes sense to skew the amount of time you spend on each to reflect this. Mini cuts allow you to stack things in your favor when it comes to maximal muscle gain long term. It allows you just to do more muscle building training across the course of a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, an entire lifting career, than if you just do the bulk cut, like sort of traditional longer cuts like those 12 weeks, because the mini cuts can just facilitate being able to get back to bulking quicker and more often, and therefore more muscle building training and this calorie surplus over time will add up to more muscle. Now, we're getting coming to the point where we wrap up my mini cut podcast here, but I just want one last analogy, and this is that, think of it as robbing the fat bank. Now, I stole this analogy from Steve Hall, a colleague of mine here in the UK, but really you should treat your mini cuts like a bank robbery. When it comes to a mini cut, get in, get what you want, get it quickly, and get out before you get in trouble, and much like a bank robber would. If they want to get in, get the cash, and leave before the police arrive, you want to get in, lose a lot of fat, and leave the scene before the negative consequences kick in. So if you're in a bank robbery, the negative consequences are you get arrested by the police and you're in jail. The negative consequences, if you diet for too long, are muscle loss and suboptimal hormonal function, which then make building muscle harder. If you do things right, you get in, you're aggressive, you get lean quickly, you can be on the run to build more muscle. So, you're not necessarily on the run for the police, but we're on the run to building more muscle. So I think it's highly effective. I utilize these myself with my clients, and they get great results. And in all fairness, mini cuts aren't, I didn't invent this. I first heard about this from Shelby Starnes, probably back in 2011, 2012. I remember reading one of his articles how he was using it with his athletes, and I started using it with them. And then basically I've spent loads of time refining the process, researching it, and finding out what works best for me and my clients. And that's what I've just presented to you in this podcast. And I hope it's really, really valuable for you and very useful. If you have any questions, as ever, I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to reach out by emailing me. The email address to get me on is tom@breakingmuscle.com, or you can just send me a message on Instagram at Tom McCormick. Drop me a DM and I'll be happy to help. Now, if you are interested in doing a mini cut yourself, you think it would be something useful for you, and you're still not entirely confident about how to set it up, for Breaking Muscle listeners, I'm going to open up a free challenge. I will set up your training and your diet strategy, the calories to be on, and the macronutrients for free, and you can access all the workouts in an app for free to do it. It's a 3-week mini cut. I actually call it a prime cut because, for those of you aware of my principles for a training phase called a primer, I utilize many of those principles, those primer phase training principles, in conjunction with a mini cut, and I really think that's a great blend that sets you up for long-term muscle gain, because the primer is designed to put your body physically in the best pace possible, from covering the 4 S's of stability, skill, structural balance, and strength output, the ability to take an exercise and really push it to elicit a training response for muscle growth. All of those components of the training phase, you combine that with the diet approach of a mini cut, and you get a kind of 2-for-1 winning combo to set you up for growth. Prime yourself for muscle growth. It really sets you up for a slingshot performance when you go to bulking, because your body's in the perfect position. It's set up structurally to gain and perform well in the gym from the primer phase type of training, and your body fat percentage point is in the ideal place to build muscle from the nutrition you've done using a mini cut. So if you are interested in jumping in, having me set up your training for a prime, like what I call that prime cut, then keep your eyes peeled. I will put some links up for that, but also, again, feel free to drop me a message, and I will also write this podcast up, or the details of this podcast up, into an article if you want to sit down and be able to read it and take notes on the Breaking Muscle website. I'm going to be working on turning this into an article for you as well, and I will make sure the guys put a link there to the Prime Cut free mini cut and primer phase training plan to get you the best results possible. So if you are still listening now, I appreciate the fact that you have taken the time to listen for so long and take these details, and as a result I just want to say thank you, and that's why I'm offering you this training plan for you to get great results and utilize all these strategies for yourself. And if you do, one thing I'd say is I'd love it if you could make sure you let people know how effective it was for you, because I genuinely think the more people we can get to understand how to properly use a mini cut, people will get much better results with their training, be more confident and happy with their results, and essentially build more muscle long term, which is what I'm trying to help everyone do. Alright guys, so like I said, thanks so much for taking the time to listen. Please take the moment also to rate and review the show. It really helps with spreading the word. Obviously, a 5-star review is desired, but you can give whatever you think is reasonable. But be careful if you review me anything other than 5 stars. I'll probably review you and give you a 1-star review. Now, joking aside, please like, share, review, all appreciated, and I will see you next time. You will hear from me next time on the Breaking Muscle podcast.